Hey, there's lots of big things happening politically on the agenda this week, Rob, but the one that really takes the cake, that has so many significant ramifications, comes back to what's happening in the ACT right now, because the Calvary Hospital that we've been talking about for a number of weeks, well, they had an injunction to stop the takeover by the ACT government, but that injunction's been dismissed by the Supreme Court last week. How significant, how serious is this now? What's developing, do you think, in the ACT?
Neil, this is very serious. Every Australian needs to be concerned about this because it's a precedent-setting situation. When you've got a situation where states and even courts, such as the Supreme Court, which is really just doing what the law says they should do, but when it happens like this, that institutions can be mandatorily taken over, we should be very concerned, and we should be thinking about where this thing stops. Now, it's not just a case of Calvary. So Calvary, of course, is the best hospital in Canberra, and that's probably without dispute. But we've got this situation where the ACT government has really exercised a very non-democratic way of doing things, reminiscent of a communist takeover, if you like. This is a six-term government, Neil, that has really overstepped its reach.
Some might be thinking here, oh, well, this is just what governments do. But they've had to seek their own legislation to be able to do this, and there'd be some reasons for that, because people and private property have been protected. How significant is it that when a government moves to do what they're doing in the ACT, it means that private property is no longer sacred in that sense?
Yeah, that's true. And the speed at which they've acted, Neil, is of great concern. And of course, they've introduced legislation that's very specific to the takeover, including the date of the takeover and the process. It's all been written into it. But another concerning thing is that there's been no process. There's just been no discussion. And so the government has stepped in. They've made a decision. The ball is now rolling. And really, this situation will only be resolved in court if it is, and there could be appeals. We don't know what that process looks like as yet. But either way, the government is not ruling out further takeovers. And so it's a very concerning situation.
You know, sometimes you can appreciate a government stepping in when there is evidence of corruption or malpractice, all sorts of things like that. But I know listeners will have heard you say Calvary Hospital is the best hospital in Canberra. And so justification for a takeover like this, some people will find this hard to swallow. It would appear that the rampant anti-life sentiments that are held by those who are in government in the ACT are pushing this. How much evidence is there that the government in the ACT is actually taking this sort of anti-life sentiment, against the thought that here's a hospital that stands for Christian values, values for the unborn, values for those who are, at the end of their lives? How significant, what sort of evidence is there that this is the reason why this attack and this takeover is happening?
Yeah, look, it's pretty hard not to join the dots when you think about it. This is a hospital that has exercised conscientious objection when it comes to abortion on demand. They've also been very upfront about the new VAD laws in the ACT. And so when you look at all those and you look at the performance of the hospital in terms of its overall care for people in Canberra, which has been exemplary, it's hard not to come to the conclusion. Now, I know it's largely anecdotal, Neil, but at the end of the day, these are the two big issues that the government has had discussion with Calvary that they're not happy. They're clearly not happy about. And so I think we're right to come to those conclusions. It's reasonably obvious to me.
Something that's coming to mind, no doubt, for a lot of people for the very first time. Who owns these facilities like hospitals? Does the government own the hospital? Does the church own the hospital? Is there a clear-cut ownership here that you're aware of, Rob?
Well, there's a lease. the hospital has a lease, Neil, and so that lease has been effectively broken. So the Catholic Church, or the Catholic organisation that runs the hospital, has had the lease over the property and the actual business itself. And so it's been run as a faith-based organisation, and the intervention of the ACT government has effectively closed that lease off and shut it down. So it is a takeover in every respect of the word.
As I understand it, still something like 70 years left to run on that lease. So when you do an agreement,
That's correct.
When you do an agreement with the ACT government, there's nothing watertight. They can just change their mind at the drop of a hat.
That's exactly right. And so now we're looking also at other organisations, and the question we have to ask, Neil, is what's next? Any organisation that doesn't line up with the ACT narrative of the government is basically in danger, and that's a real concern to us.
So not just hospitals, but schools, aged care facilities, are they all now in some ways at risk in the ACT, and if there is some precedence in every other state around Australia?
Yeah, look, definitely the Clare Holland House Hospice also has an uncertain future in Canberra, and the government hasn't ruled out a takeover of that either. So we really need to be vigilant. We need to be ahead of the curve when it comes to these things. And unfortunately, it seems that the modus operandi of the ACT government is to act hastily, to jump in and make the takeover, and then allow the pieces to be swept up later. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you've got a 6-term government with a large majority.
And the ACL, I know you are saying to people who live in the ACT, those Canberra residents, remember this takeover when the next election rolls around, because this is something clearly that is outside of what we understand as a sound democratic-run government. So what's your thoughts here for listeners in and around the ACT around what they might do at this time? Because it seems like most people will be powerless.
Exactly, and this the takeover has really put people on alert on both sides of politics, and so it's not a partisan thing. People in the church concerned about it, people outside the church are looking on and joining the dots, Neil. So we obviously this is an election issue now. The Canberra Liberals have certainly sniffed that, and they're talking that up, and so ACL will certainly be reminding people of the way the Parliament has voted on this.
Okay, more to come on that Calvary Hospital issue in the ACT.